when the embassy said that I had to make another trip back to Barbados to fill out forms again, I said, I wonder if these guys in the New York Times would do an article about how difficult you're making it to renounce my citizenship. Isn't there any way you could just send me something and I can sign it and send it back? So they sent me something, I signed it and sent it back. And it's weird that you can say that you want to renounce your citizenship and they can say, no, we're not going to let you. It's like, I quit. No, you can't quit. What?
We're joined by one of the OGs in renouncing U.S. citizenship. He's lived a fascinating life. Vincent, Kate, good to have you with us. You grew up in the United States. You went to Berkeley. My understanding is you worked in Silicon Valley back in the 80s. Give me a little bit of your origin story and what made you think the U.S. wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. Maybe you'd want to leave.
Yeah. So I, come from the Libertarian family and, reading Ayn Rand at a young age and always wanted, more freedom, keep the money I earned and all that kind of stuff. When I was in college and grad school, I sort of read books about different countries that were tax havens and decided that one of those would be a nice place to go to and that saving all the taxes that I might be paying would be a big improvement. I went and checked out 5 different islands in the Caribbean, one of which was Anguilla, and decided to move here.
And why the Caribbean?
Just because there's a bunch of different countries close together and, not too far away as far as time zones, and lots of people speak English. And it just seemed not too far to go, and yet far enough that we were no longer paying U.S. taxes.
I've been to places like Vanuatu, for example, and you see the Americans who've gone there and guys who renounced citizenship back in the 80s. That was a bit too far afield, you thought? Well,
I also had been to Cancun on a spring break and decided that these tropical beaches and, fresh air, that seemed like if you could go live there, why wouldn't you,
So the idea was you wanted to save the taxes, or did you see this more as pushing back on the U.S. government for being heavy-handed?
I wanted to write cryptography, and back at that time, the cryptography was covered by the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, ITAR, and they considered my brain sort of their territory. And so getting out of their territory and getting my brain free from their legal system meant that I could then write cryptography without being in trouble. And so that was part of it. Also, the taxes are part of it. A big reason was because I wanted to do software that was doing internet payment systems with cryptography. And if I wrote that software while I was a US citizen, I wouldn't be able to sell it around the world. And so getting rid of my citizenship was like a step in my business plan, basically.
What were your thoughts as a libertarian and as an American that your government could tell you you can't take part in this emerging technology? Doesn't that kind of seem crazy? Like, we're going to tell you what you can do?
Yeah, it just seemed like they're just trying to take too much control over people, and that I didn't want to be part of that. So I left.
Why do you think the U.S. does that? Because I presume what you've seen when you traveled around is most countries don't really have those restrictions. And even if they do, for people who live there, they don't hunt you down around the world if you're their citizen to tell you you can't be in a certain industry. Why do you think the U.S. does that so exclusively?
Well, they're trying to collect money from people all over and trying to control everything all over. Yeah, most countries wouldn't try to tax you once you left that country. The U.S. is just a little extreme in that area.
But you're the example that a lot of people don't talk about. I have friends who have businesses in Asia, and they're Americans, and they have to follow U.S. regulations that are often different than what they would be expected to follow in Asia, and nobody really understands why they follow those regulations, but they have to just because they're a citizen. That has nothing to do with the tax. The U.S. imposes these regulatory requirements on you when you don't live there, and I'm wondering if the U.S. government, in your dealings with them, did they kind of think, yeah, you just want to pay tax? Did they believe you that this is about your convictions, that you want to be in this industry and we're stopping you?
So I did it right out of grad school, right? So I didn't have any money. They might want to tax me, but there was nothing to tax, right? And so, if they wanted to pretend that I sold everything and paid capital gains, there was no capital gains on anything because I didn't own anything.
And when you renounced, it was a different regime. I mean, they streamlined it in the 2000s. You renounced in the 1990s. Let's walk backwards. What year did you first leave the U.S.?
I left the U.S. in 1994.
1994, and you went to Anguilla.
Yeah.
Having read books and checked out 5 different islands. What were the other islands?
I went to Antigua, to Montserrat, to Nevis, St. Kitts, and St. Martin, just to sort of get a feel for the Caribbean, partly.
Why did Anguilla beat out the other islands? I imagine you were happy you weren't on Montserrat.
This was before the volcano, so Montserrat looked fine before the volcano.
That's exactly. You're glad you weren't there.
It was pretty beautiful, green and everything. But yes, I was very glad I didn't end up there after the volcano erupted. Anguilla, there was some offshore industry. There were some people that were interested in doing things to avoid companies to avoid taxes and all that. It's just beautiful beaches. It's got a lot of land with views of the ocean because it's fairly flat, and there's not that many people really compared to the amount of coastal land, and the inland land even has views as well. So the first house that I rented, it was like $470 a month for a house with an amazing view of the ocean. I wasn't next to the ocean, but I had an amazing view. I could see, St. Martin and St. Bart's, and it was lovely. It was partly the cost of living. Some of the other, I looked at, the Cayman Islands and Bermuda would have been nice, but they were too expensive for me. I didn't have any money. I had to sort of earn money to stay alive, right? And I ended up doing, an email business. Was my first thing, and then I did web pages for people, and I did various things along the line.
So you moved there in the 90s, and how long did it take before you renounced your citizenship?
So I moved in 94, and it was 97 that I put in the application, and 98 that they actually granted it. Went to the consulate. They claimed that the first forms that I filled out was like, oh, those are the wrong forms. And then they made me, wait around and do some more forms for another couple hours. And then after I got back to Anguilla, they said, oh, those are the wrong forms again. You have to come back. The New York Times had done an article about me renouncing my citizenship for crypto, because that's kind of an unusual thing back then, right? And so I when the embassy said that I had to make another trip back to Barbados to fill out forms again, I said, I wonder if these guys in the New York Times would do an article about how crazy you're making it, how difficult you're making it to renounce my citizenship. Isn't there any way you could just send me something and I can sign it and send it back? And they said, oh, okay. So they sent me something, I signed it and sent it back, and they eventually accepted my. It's weird that you can say that you want to renounce your citizenship and they can say, no, we're not going to let you. It's like, I quit. No, you can't quit. What?
They generally do approve them. We saw during the pandemic, obviously people, the embassies were open for other things, but not for renunciations in many cases. People had to go to Chad or Armenia or something. So what were you doing, though, for those 3 years while you moved until you renounced? Did you live differently then that caused you to say, hey, I want to renounce? Were you testing the waters?
Yeah, I guess you could say I wasn't sure I was going to make it or something, because it takes a while to start making some money somehow. And I was comfortable that I could live here forever, sort of, after a few years.
So you wanted to basically make sure, hey, I don't need to go back to the U.S. financially, because, back in the 90s, it was still one of the lesser number of countries where you could get a good job. There was less online work back then, obviously. And you wanted to make sure, hey, I like this new place I've moved.
Yeah. There was a little bit of the, Cortez burning his ships. So he, the men couldn't go back. They had to stay there. And it was like, am I ready to burn the ships? Right? It was interesting in the late 90s, there was sort of a dot-com boom. And there was a bunch of people, maybe like 20 different crypto guys. We did a conference here on financial cryptography. So there was a bunch of people that would come here for this conference, and some of them would stay every year. So we ended up with about 20 serious cryptographer programmer guys here. And then when the dot-com bubble popped, they all left because they were all being funded, with ongoing investment, not because they were the companies weren't making a profit yet, right?
Right.
And so they all disappeared. And so I say I'm the last hacker standing. Part of being the last hacker standing was that I had burned my ships, right? I couldn't go back. I had to stay here. And so somehow it had to work.
I know the feeling, right? 1997, I mean, there were a handful of celebrities who had renounced, some of them because they had to become a princess somewhere or to do whatever. What did people in your personal life say when you told them you were renouncing U.S. citizenship? Did the Libertarian family, were they more understanding than you would have imagined?
I've always been somewhat of an oddball, right? Doing strange things. So, they were understanding.
Do you regret not riding at the dot-com bubble in the U.S. and making more money and then going? Or you're happy that you did it when you did it?
The way it's worked out, I'm absolutely fine. So
yeah,
it's been a good adventure.
How did the government treat you back then? Again, the numbers were much smaller for renunciations.
It was weird. While I was renouncing, it was like they were trying to, pretend the paperwork wasn't right and we couldn't do this. But once they, agreed the paperwork was okay, I didn't have any more trouble with the U.S.
Besides the paperwork, I mean, they were polite to you? They were professional?
It sort of seems like, they didn't want me to do it, right?
My experience is like they almost kind of pity you a little bit. I mean, I had a very professional experience. I have nothing bad to say about it in that regard. But it almost seemed like one of the women kind of like was sad for me.
I don't know. It's a long time ago at this point, but I just remember It seemed like they were making it difficult, right? Repeatedly saying that, oh, those were the wrong forms. You have to start over.
What I think most people would imagine, and shame on me, even when I read your story, I kind of thought, oh, what was his citizenship? People would imagine, oh, he's in Anguilla, that's where he's a citizen. And obviously, as a British overseas territory, it's kind of a different story than being the citizen of a sovereign country. You actually were not a citizen there. What citizenship did you have?
So I found someplace on the internet that was selling, Mozambique citizenship for $5,000. I sent off the $5,000 and got back a Mozambique passport, but the passport had changed my name to, Vincente, and it claimed that I was born in Mopatu. And it's like, no, I did not put that on the application. I did not, I spelled my name right and, put down where I was born correctly and all that kind of stuff, right? Afterwards, I decided that probably somebody was making a fake birth certificate and then applying for the passport with that. And that therefore this passport was a little shaky.
Yeah.
And so I was glad later, I married an Anguillian, and that helped me get Anguillian citizenship. And so then I was and then once you have the Anguillan citizenship, you can get the British citizenship. So I don't use the Mozambique passport anymore.
But you were Mozambican when you renounced.
Yes, I was Mozambican when I renounced. But afterwards, I'm not sure that was a legitimate Mozambique passport. It may have been gotten under fraudulent, with fraudulent paperwork, right?
And did the U.S. Embassy ask you to hey, what's your citizenship so we can feel comfortable letting you renounce, or they didn't care?
Yeah, they won't let you. They wouldn't let me renounce unless I had some other citizenship. They didn't say, but it says you're born in Mopatu. They didn't say that, right? Which I was very glad they didn't do that, because it is like, I don't know. This is a little weird.
And so in Anguilla, you had to go and tell them with your residence status, like, hey, I'm not American anymore, I'm Mozambican. Did they say anything weird about that?
That's a long time ago. I think, I had to get the passport. We get a work permit. Right. And the work permit, I think they had to stamp the passport. So there may have been a couple stamps in there for that or something, but they knew who I was at that point, and I'm not sure that it really bothered them which passport they were stamping.
That seems to be true in most countries. I mean, outside of the US and Australia and maybe a couple others, I think most, you're Mozambican, you're Serbian, you're whatever, who cares, right?
It's a fairly small island, and I'm kind of a standout somewhat. And we had done things like made a computer club, and I was doing email, and so teaching people about the internet and email and all this kind of stuff. It seemed okay at the time, but again, after I got it, I was like, oh geez, I don't think this is legit. It was supposed to be a development program that the government was raising money, right? But after seeing that they changed saying where I was born, it's like, okay, no, I think they made a fake birth certificate. I don't think the government got the $5,000. I think it's some enterprising individual who's, maybe they have a cousin in the passport office or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, now there's always somebody doing the Mexican passport deal where we've got a guy who will put you in the system. You don't want to do that. Yeah. Who had citizenship by investment? I mean, St. Kitts had a program. Had you gone to St. Kitts because you knew they had a citizenship program? You said you didn't have a lot of money. It was expensive back then.
At the time that I moved down here, I wasn't thinking about what new citizenship to get yet.
Right.
Okay. I just wanted to get down here and start writing software. And
yeah, I think Belize even had a program back then, like for 40,000. I remember Peru was doing something around that time. Like the prices back then were so much different. Yeah, but even back then, I think $5,000 seems a little cheap. So, okay, you get to the island, and you like seem to have really settled in because I mean, Mozambique in the 90s, you couldn't travel many places, right?
We had to make a special trip to Barbados to get a visa to go to the United States, right? So I went.
You got a U.S. visa as a Mozambican?
I got a U.S. visa in my Mozambican passport and visited my family in the United States on the Mozambique passport.
This is you're from Maputo?
Yes.
How did that meeting go? They didn't ask you any questions? That was pre 9/11, but
I don't know, but it's a there's a day of travel, there's a day of waiting around at the to get the visa and a day coming back. It was like 3 days of my life just to get permission to go to the United States, right? That wasn't fun. With the Anguilla and the British, of course, it's easy now. There's an online visa waiver. You pay the $30 or whatever, and you're allowed to go to the United States for the next year or two or whatever.
did you just get the one passport, or did they ever renew
I
it?
got the one passport. I never tried to renew it. After it was good for some number of years, 5 or 10 or whatever, and
Right.
I just before that was a problem. I was going to get Anguilla citizenship, so we just stayed here until I got the Anguillan citizenship, and then traveled with that from then on.
Yeah, I would imagine that sounds like the kind of passport that they like. That's a one-time thing. They basically just gave you a passport, not necessarily a citizenship.
Yeah,
There's no
it really, like I
citizenship.
said, I really didn't trust it afterwards. I did travel on it at least once.
Your idea was, I basically want to live in Anguilla, and I'm just going to stay there, and I'm not trying to be crisscrossing the globe. Therefore, the passport itself wasn't as important. One of the things that stood out to me is you started a very interesting business, or you helped the government get into this with what we would call a CCTLD, the local domain name, which in the island is .ai. And you helped them cash in very early on having the rights to the .ai domain. How did you get started with that?
So when I did this email business, I wanted to register the domain offshore.ai. I contacted John Postal, and he said, nobody's running .ai. Do you want to run it? I said, okay. And so I was in charge of .ai, and it was actually listed like I was the admin contact and the technical contact. It was just mine. And after a few years, I felt bad about that. And so I changed it to where the government of Anguilla was the admin contact. And I didn't really talk to the government about it because I was doing it for free. I was only letting Anguillians register domain names. I wasn't letting people outside. And I wasn't
You got to set all the rules.
I was running the whole thing, right? So I let Anguillians register domains for free, and I didn't let people outside register, right? And somebody saw that it was registered, that the admin contact was the government of Anguilla, contacted the government and said they wanted to run it. And so the government gave it to this company in Taiwan. And then that company disappeared. In a year or two, they weren't answering emails. Their company was struck from the books in Taiwan. There was, and they weren't answering phones. There's nothing, right? And so I got the government to bring it back and let me run it. And then we started selling it to the whole world, and then it just kept growing from there.
In recent years, that must be making a fortune, .ai.
Yeah. It's about $4 million a month to the government right now.
Wow. How much does the government get for each domain? Because there's different prices you can pay with different registrars, but how much do they get?
So we're charging the registrars $140 for 2 years.
Right. It's not a cheap one, right? This is not .com where they get $1 or something. This is, okay. So $140 for 2 years. So you have to do it for 2 years at a time. And they're making almost $50 million a year for the government of this tiny island.
So it shot up at the end of 2022 when ChatGPT came out. It went from, less than $1 million to over 3 million. Since we do it for 2 years, the renewals for the people that signed up then are going to kick in around the end of this year. When the renewals kick in, we're essentially going to double because we're going to get, the ongoing 4 million a month and then renewals of almost that as well. And so we'll be over 6 million a month anyway by, April of next year.
What is the budget of the entire island?
The budget is around 12 million US a month. So we're, around a third of the budget. And if the budget stayed the same, we'll be about 2/3 of the budget next year. Nobody really expects it to stay the same when there's more money coming in, right?
So this is what I love about these small countries and the opportunities and how they can be more laissez-faire, because you can fund half the bloody government just off of a little domain name, which happened to take off.
And they've already gotten rid of property tax on residences. So they've eliminated a whole category of taxation. I don't know of another country that had property tax and got rid of it. I find this encouraging.
There must be one or two. There must be one or two, but yes, I've seen certainly countries lower the property tax because they have an influx. You know, if you're in the U.S. and they had a surplus, they would just go start a new war or something.
They'd spend it somehow.
They would find some way to spend it. Do you think, how many people live on Anguilla?
Like 14,000 or something.
14,000, right. And so you can get a residence permit if you buy property. It's not one of the cheaper ones, but you can get a residence permit and live there because it's tax friendly and all that. What is it the government will spend this extra largesse on, do you think? Like, what are the areas of improvement there?
Well, they've been doing an awful lot of construction, you know, new buildings. They're extending the runway, building a new airport building. There's, you know, they're doing a lot of stuff. And how much of it is exactly, you know, from dot.ai, it's, you know, it's all one big budget. So who knows? When I moved here, there was no wages tax and there was no sales tax or goods and services tax, right? The wages tax, they put in something maybe like 2009 or something, you know, around then. And it was called the, you know, temporary interim stabilization levy. They just needed to stabilize the government's budget. And it was just an interim, you know, just a temporary measure. And of course, they never got rid of it. They eventually changed the name to the universal levy. There's some chance that they could get rid of that. In Anguilla, you have all these rich tourists coming in and they're spending $2,000 a night for a bed. And then you have the maid who's getting paid $6 an hour to change the sheets on the bed. Taxing the tourist, no Anguillian has a problem with them taxing the $2,000 a night, you know, tourist. But taxing the maid's salary, taking money out of her paycheck when she's getting $6 an hour, it just doesn't seem right. And there's an election coming up in like a year and 4 months or something. And I'm hopeful that this temporary interim stabilization levy, where they're taking money out of the maid's paycheck, will go away before the election. They certainly can, because the total amount of money that is like 7 million a year or something. Eliminating it, given the growth in dot.ai, they absolutely have the capacity to eliminate it. And if you're trying to get elected, I would say that's a very good move because the maid votes, right? The tourist doesn't vote. Taxing the tourist, it's fine, but taxing the maid and her $6 an hour salary, it just doesn't.
Would you put yourself out there for some sort of office or some sort of commendation on the basis that your dot.ai was what eliminated the tax?
I want to make it very clear to everybody, it's not my dot.ai, right? This belongs to the government, and it's, no, but the government could replace me at any time. The contract is, you know, they could switch out somebody else to run it. It's not mine in any
Sure.
meaningful sense.
But you got it started, and now they're making some money, and
But other people had the idea too, right?
Sure.
There was this company in Taiwan that had the idea. Lots of people understand domain names can make money.
Execution's everything. I know you said you started the computer club and did other stuff locally. You're an example of someone who goes to a place and you live there and you get settled in. Overall, would you say you feel less stressed? You feel happier than living in the U.S.?
My commute is, you know, 6 minutes or something, and there's no traffic, and it's nice.
Because I was surprised when you had something where you were telling people in the 90s you could become an arms trafficker by clicking a button on a website. Tell us about that. I'm surprised that the U.S. government didn't come after you for that.
The ITAR, International Traffic in Arms Regulations, said that if you exported cryptography, that you were violating the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. So I made a website where there was a form with the default text, which was a 3-line RSA encryption program. And if you clicked the submit button on the form, it would send that from wherever you were to Anguilla. So if you were in the United States and you clicked submit, you were exporting a cryptographic program from the United States to Anguilla, thereby violating the ITAR, making you an arms trafficker. And so I called it the International Arms Trafficker Training Page. If you search for that, you can still find the page in Google. We had some, 20,000 people or something, click the button, right? It actually got onto CNN. Some tech thing on CNN covered it.
What did they think about it?
Civil disobedience, right? You're making fun of, you're breaking a law publicly and saying it's a stupid law. And there's no way they're going to arrest 20,000 people for clicking a button, right? It just can't happen.
Did you ever hear anything from the government?
There was somebody in the local Anguilla government that's like, what's this arms trafficker thing, right? So I had to explain what was going on. Nobody ever got too serious about it. It was clearly a joke, right? If clicking a button makes you an arms trafficker, then there's something wrong with the law. That just doesn't make sense.
I think that's how they think on Anguilla and most other places, but probably not the U.S. Overall, though, you feel
But they did change the law. Like a couple years later, that the law changed. So
Right.
it was part of the feedback system.
you've gone on to become an Anguillan citizen, and so that's a BOT. Have you been back to the U.S. since, or you stay on the island mostly?
No, I go back every year or two, but yeah,
Do you have any regrets?
no, I think it's been fun. It's been a good time.
Lastly, there's a lot of folks who are now doing what you did. We've talked about it. A lot of people are talking about expatriating from the U.S. What do you make of that? The fact that you were one of the earlier people doing this? What's your advice to those folks, the new guard?
The fact that I did it right out of college, where I didn't have any money, I think made it easier. It's simpler. If you have a bunch of money when you're leaving, they want a cut of it, right? And so I think that the way I did it was a good thing.
And so let's just take a minute to address that if you want to move overseas, if you want to lower your taxes, if you want fewer regulations, if you want more opportunities and more freedom, you want to make sure you're doing it legally. You want to make sure you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. That's what Nomad Capitalist helps people do. You can go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn how to put our knowledge, our network's knowledge to work for you. You can leave the United States. You can leave any number of other countries that we help people leave. Legally reduce your taxes. Find a place to go. Not just one place that we offer. We offer dozens of different options. And when you move there, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So you can move one place and move your money somewhere else. Move your business somewhere else. We help you put all those pieces together. If you are a successful entrepreneur or investor, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. Learn how we can put our knowledge to work for you.